Chapter 4. At the end of the year, one of the traditions of North High was to have the senior sob assembly. Neither the junior nor sophomore classes attended, and the one scheduled for this afternoon was no exception. Jason found himself managing the stage, along with his partner in crime and lifelong friend, Rhand Thorpe. They'd gone to school together for years, and despite coming from completely different walks of life, never seemed to clash. Rhand stood just inside the backstage double doors, a wireless headset over one ear, carefully watching the silly activities on the stage. Meanwhile, Jason stepped out the door into the bright afternoon light streaming down the hallway running along the back of the auditorium. He didn't have the headset on right now, since Rhand had used it only a minute or so earlier to get a visual cue from the spotlight booth behind the audience. Sighing heavily, Jason stretched his back a bit and glanced up and down the hall. It was nearly deserted, with the exception of two rough-looking seniors hanging out near the door to the parking lot. This wouldn't have caught Jason's eye so much if it wasn't for the fact that they were near 3 boxes of stage supplies stacked in that corner, waiting to be stored downstairs. One of them was open, and the taller of the two students had a shiny cylinder in his hands. Jason knew this was a dumb idea, but he could feel the week's fatigue beginning to wear on him, and he didn't respond to the warning bells going off in the back of his mind. He approached the two guys, his eyes intent in the cylinder, which was revealed as a can of spray paint the closer he came. Aren't you guys supposed to be in the assembly?" he asked, halting his approach while still several feet away. The shorter, squatter of the two looked at Jason and grinned. His yellow teeth were grimy behind his cracked lips. "Hey, Cody," he growled. "This kid thinks we should be in some stupid assembly." Cody, by far the tallest and meaner-looking of the two, his hair cropped very short and several runes tattooed into his scalp, turned his attention away from the spray can in his hands to peer at Jason. "Really, Slash?" he growled. "I just figured I'd catch the repeat of it next year. It's the same every year. I've already seen it twice." Cody's friend laughed very loudly and stood up. He sized up Jason, then took a menacing step toward him. "I'd beat it, were I you," he instructed and swore at Jason for emphasis. The young stage manager recognized Cody as one of the school's classic troublemakers. He hung around with a circle of drugged-out street toughs called the Slammers, and the tech crew had had run-ins with them before. Nothing had ever escalated beyond shoving and tossing insults back and forth, which is why Jason didn't fear the twosome before him as much as he probably should have. At the top of the hall, Rhand stepped around the corner and spied Jason facing off against Cody's partner. He immediately retreated back around the corner, whispering urgently into the wireless headset. "I don't want any trouble," Jason said, but followed with, "You probably ought to put that away." Cody held up the can for verification, and when Jason nodded, he turned and put a silver streak of paint along the back corner of the hallway. "Hey!" Jason exclaimed. "I'm not kidding!" Tossing the can over his shoulder, Cody stood up, ready to take Jason on, until he noticed that a crowd had gathered beyond the youth, primarily made up of the assembly's stage crew. He also saw that Michael Pierce, the theater director, was numbered among the silent observers. "You're Shawnie Blake's boyfriend, ain't you?" Cody observed. Taken aback, Jason only nodded. Shaking his head, Cody growled, "Sad world we live in when a fine chick like her goes out with a prick like you." With that, Cody turned and pushed his friend out the doors into the afternoon sun, all without throwing a punch. School let out 2.5 hours later, and Shawnie felt like it hadn't come fast enough. For some reason which she couldn't fathom, water polo practice just hadn't gone as well as she'd wanted. She felt fortunate that she had it at the end of the day so she could head straight for Jason's locker and not have to fight the crush back to her own locker, located closer in toward the school's main traffic area. She found Jason and Bryant by their adjoining lockers, Karen waiting patiently nearby. "You ready?" Jason asked and shut the locker. His music theory book and folder rested in the palm of his left hand. He downed a swig from a heavily caffeinated can of cola, then he tossed the empty can into a nearby garbage can. "Let's hit it," Ryan answered and grabbed his pre-calculus book. Then he slammed his locker and spun the combination lock to scramble it. "Hi, guys," she called. That dangerous, cocky smile of Jason's flashed to his lips when he turned and saw her. It made her tingle up her back and feel fluttery in her stomach. Even though his 1980s fascination bugged her, including his shaggy blonde hair, she still felt that drawn-to-him emotion from their first meeting. "Hey, beautiful," he greeted her, immediately taking her gym bag in his left hand with his books, then slipping his right hand into her left. The four of them walked out of the school and headed for the parking lot. They talked about little things as they walked up to the black Trans Am. Deactivating the car alarm with Jason's keyring also unlocked both doors with a chirp. Bryant held the door open so that Karen could climb in first, while Jason took a minute to lower the car's soft top. With everyone settled in and the engine running, Jason said, "We are out of here," and backed the car up, then drove it out of the parking lot. As they turned out onto the road, Jason relaxed a little and Shawnie turned on the radio. "Do you have your tunes with you?" Bryant asked the driver. "Just the usual, hairbands, and more hairbands," Jason answered. "Forever stuck in the 80s? Karen teased him from behind. Running his fingers through his own, the driver replied, "You know it." Shawnie cringed inside, then took out Bon Jovi and put it in the stereo. "Proudly," she announced as Bounce began to play. Shawnie and Jason both heard Karen's hesitation from the back seat. "Jake, do you mind if I ask a question? It's kind of personal." Karen had always found the idea of calling a guy Jake when his name wasn't Jacob silly. Her familiar use of his nickname caught his attention, and Jason flicked the rearview mirror down so he could see her reflection in the glass. "Sure, what's up?" "I was wondering where you got the car," Karen said. With a teasing grin, Jason replied, "From the dealership," for which Shawnie slapped him lightly on the leg. "I only asked," Karen stumbled on, "because some of the girls in geometry asked what it was like hanging out with the richest kid in school, and I just—" She hesitated, and Shawnie wondered if she felt like she'd said too much. A member of the Mormon faith, Karen held other people's feelings in very high regard. She also knew that Jason's attitude could be extremely manic about his family's wealth, sometimes hiding it like a curse, other times wielding it like Arthur wielded Excalibur. She hoped she could count on him to be tactful with his answer. "I'm hardly the richest kid in the school, Karen," Jason replied, to which Bryant snorted his derision. "Despite what the rumor mongers say," he added, silencing Bryant with a glare in the mirror. "My dad and I were discussing the stock market a year or so back, and we decided to see who could make the best investments over a given period of time. Dad loaned me some money out of my trust fund, and we went to work." "Yeah, his mom wasn't happy about it at all," Bryant noted softly. Jason nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "True as blue. Anyway, when we were done, I paid my trust fund back and bought this with what I had left. Simple." Karen's gaze narrowed. "How old are you, really?" That quirky grin of his returned to his attractive face, and he replied, 16, why?" Sitting back in the small back seat, resting partially against Bryant's shoulder, Karen replied, "Sometimes you seem older than you are, I guess." "It's a curse," Shawnie chided him. "It comes from having an untrackable IQ," Jason bragged in such a manner that none of them knew if he was serious or kidding. Bryant whispered into Karen's ear, "More like an incurable attitude." As they cruised up the town's main thoroughfare, Jason called back, "I heard that."